Hani Mustafa is a Palestine analyst at the International Crisis Group, and she joins us now live from Amman in Jordan. So for you, Tahani, is this, as our correspondent Zena Tahan was saying, is this a moment for pause then for the people of Gaza who have suffered for so many months?
Certainly should be a moment of reprieve for those that have been suffering for the last 15, 16 months now. And that's definitely what phase one, at the very least, is intended to achieve. Although, again, it's an incredibly weak premise in which this entire ceasefire deal is based upon. So there's really no guarantee that we could see a total cessation, at least for the full 42 days, which is what phase one is meant to be. So it could, at the very least, we could see more sufficient amounts of aid getting in. It's something like 600 trucks, I believe, has been agreed, which is, again, nowhere near as sufficient as what Gaza needs, but still better than what's currently getting in now. So it certainly gives them a bit of a breather. But the more substantial parts here, in terms of ensuring that Gazans really do get the reprieve that they need, is in phase 2 and 3. And those are absolutely not in any way guaranteed right now.
And Tahani, can you talk us through perhaps, what your organisation, the International Crisis Group, is trying to do on the ground to effect change in Gaza?
Well, right now we're trying to sort of push at least the political necessity of ensuring that there are first and foremost guarantees that Israel will go ahead with, as I said, the more substantial parts, which are phase 2 and hopefully 3. And it's really just trying to sort of get the message across that a total cessation is in both sides' interest right now, whether it's Israel's sense of security or whether it's the fact that Gazans right now need, the humanitarian toll that the last 16 months have taken have been substantial. So this is really about trying to not only ensure that we have guarantees, but actually ensuring that all stakeholders involved, including the guarantors of this ceasefire deal, really do put the political pressure that is needed on both sides to guarantee that this really sees its way through.
Now, you spoke there about guarantees, but guarantees will also be needed on the ground to ensure that these 600 trucks, do come in. Today we've had, I think, 200 aid delivery trucks coming in that have carried about 20, were carrying fuel. So how important is it that there is the right security provided on the ground? But can it be also provided, given the sort of chaotic nature and so many moving parts as this ceasefire deal is implemented?
Well, it certainly can be done. That is part of the weakness of this deal, right? So there are no serious implementation strategies, and behind that, there's no actual guarantee that, as you say, the distribution of aid will be well, first of all, will actually take place, and secondly, that there'll be a safe route for that distribution of aid. And I think again that goes back to the real weakness behind the entire premise of this entire deal. We had seen just before the ceasefire took effect, even during the delay phase, Hamas needed the arrangements in order to logistically sort of get the names of those that are alive and those that have been killed in order to hand over to the Israelis. And again, Israel had relayed back on those arrangements, pummeling Gaza through airstrikes and surveillance. So, to really see phase 1, to ensure that Israel's not going to do the same thing, to ensure that Israel's not going to try and find leeways as it did back in November 2023, which was the last pause we saw, and again where Israel was restricting the amount of aid going in despite what had been arranged. It goes back to the fact that we really can't concretely say that there's going to be any substantial pressure from the guarantors of this deal that Israel will abide by its terms of the agreement.
But what can the international community and, aid organisations like yourself do to ensure that this ceasefire does continue and all phases are actually implemented?
Well, look, it's quite substantial, I think, in terms of looking at the task ahead, especially when it comes to phase 3. But just when it comes to phase 1 and 2, that's really not in the hands of international aid organizations. That is really ultimately in the hands of those states that have the leverage to ensure that Israel, which is the more superior when it comes to military power here, it is a superior party to the conflict, that Israel does abide by what has been agreed. If we're looking at Egypt, Qatar, and the US to do that, Egypt and Qatar have no leverage over Israel. That's really up to the US. And unfortunately, we've already seen messages coming from both the previous administration and the incoming administration that are really sort of contradicting the premise of what has been agreed, even with phase one, giving Israel really just leeway to break this pause if it sees fit.
Do you feel as if I mean, I know that it's only day one, but do you feel as if this reconstruction phase could actually take effect? I mean, again, it's so many moving parts. I mean, where would people even go?
Well, it's difficult to imagine the reconstruction phase taking place. I think, aid organizations had resigned themselves months ago to the idea that no one can realistically expect Israel to allow reconstruction to take place, at least not in the next 3 to 5 years. The best we can hope for is similar to what we have now, right, where Gaza has literally been relegated to a tent city in the ruins, dependent on aid for everything, and where at best we can hope that you'll have private companies that will ensure the distribution and some sense of law and order. But in terms of actual, I mean, if we're talking about substantive reconstruction here, that is not in Israel's plans for the day after. It's not in Israel's plans, at least in the more immediate term, to allow for reconstruction to take place in Gaza. And I think what's compounding that problem is also that contradicts the vision that Israel's Western allies have for the day after, or at least in phase 3, where you've got the US that has been pushing since the start of this onslaught to have the PA reinstated in Gaza, which is in complete contradictions to what Israel wants and what ultimately Israel will allow. Because I really doubt that we're going to see that political pressure coming from the Trump administration that, as I said, has already sent messages basically contradicting the premise of this entire ceasefire deal.
And then just a final question, Tahani. I mean, obviously we're only in, as we said, the first day. But what would be your immediate hopes or the minimum you want to see done or provided to Gazans in this first phase, and especially during the first few days of phase 1?
I mean, at bare minimum, I think I do think that Gazans are owed sufficient amounts of aid going in, access to aid, medical care, the ability to be able to go back to their homes, those that have been displaced from the north to the south. Just being able to sort of have that moment of reprieve, not having to worry of, at any moment you have Israel sort of continuing its airstrikes and its offensive. So I really do think that at the very minimum, Gazans deserve at least the first phase, which would be either the 16 or 42 days, and a fair exchange of prisoners, as has been agreed.
Okay, Tahani Mustafa, we leave it there. But, thank you for joining us, and, the best of luck with your organisation to provide, of course, help to people on the ground.